Okay, it's a pleasure to be here and actually, I think it's also a good opportunity for our panelists to interact with our audience. So I think we have about 1 hour,
15
right?
minutes.
15 minutes. So I think we can leave about 10 or 15 minutes to the audience to interact with us. Okay. So first of all, I think maybe we can one by one introduce ourselves and our firm. Okay, maybe we can start from Jason.
Sure. So hi, I'm Jason Brown. I'm with Seabridge Capital, and we are a healthcare-focused growth equity fund based in China. We have about $600 million under management, including our current fund that just closed, which is a $400 million US dollar fund. I'm probably a little bit out of place here because I said we're a growth equity fund, so that means that we're typically looking for somewhat later stage investments in assets, because our strategy is really to invest in the growth opportunity of healthcare in China as opposed to the early stage opportunity. And so about half of our fund will be invested in med tech and services, and those will typically be revenue stage companies in China raising additional capital for growth. On the pharma side, we are looking at things that are pre-commercial. So what we consider growth for the China market are typically things that could be commercial but also could still be in clinical development. And what we like to do is either find existing strong companies in China to invest in, or to find ways to bring products from the West to China, and that's something that I spend most of my time on. So most of the team is based in China. The pharma team is based in Shanghai, and there's around 12 or so people on the pharma team, and then we have a few people in our Beijing office also. And then we have 2 people in the US, actually 3 now, because we just added an operating partner. And we spend most of our time looking for ways to partner with US companies to bring assets or technologies to China. And we're typically looking for things that are somewhat de-risked, meaning they're innovative for the China market, but it's more of an execution strategy where we can fund the development of the product or the commercialization of those products in China to try to close the innovation gap that exists between the state of innovation in the US in terms of products available for patients and the state of innovation in China for patients. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure we can add more later.
So Life Capital, we were founded in 2015, but despite we're a relatively young fund, we've been fortunate to raise 2 funds by now, and our second fund recently closed 3 weeks ago at about 419 million. Total asset under management is about 700 million. I think our strategy resonates quite well with Seabridge, which is we primarily focus on, I think for our first fund, we primarily focus on China investment in growth stage, primarily because the exit profile in Chinese companies is a little more difficult for earlier stage companies who go IPO, earlier stage being clinical or preclinical. Whereas in the U.S. side, so for our second fund, we're allocating about 60 million for U.S. dollar investments in U.S. companies. And essentially, because the exit profile in the U.S. is much more open for these earlier stage companies, that is a target that is a specific target that we'll be looking at as well in China. Now, if you see my little placard here, it says BD Director, and so the Life Capital strategy essentially is we have. Whenever we invest in a company, we want to make sure they have a pan-Pacific or cross-Pacific type strategy. And that would be either our Chinese companies wanting a relationship in the US, whether it be a licensing, M&A, or investment opportunity, or vice versa, we're looking for potential US companies that want to look for a China angle. And it's okay to not have a China angle. We would help you develop that China angle, provided China is such a nebulous market. You don't know most people don't know who the real big players are, and don't know how to appropriately engage them. And additionally, there's all these communication and cultural concerns that our objective is, as investors, we will help you address.
Jules is a little bit separate from my colleagues here. We are actually a US-based fund with a very large proportion of Chinese LPs. So we typically look towards US, Europe, sort of agnostically to wherever the best value in technology and healthcare arena we can find. So our approach is a little different, but that doesn't exclude or preclude from us going back into China, which we have. With my LPs, even before Jules Fund, we are actually right now raising our second fund. We were very heavily involved in investments within China also. So, but I think we, having scoped out most of the world, for my personal preference, have an issue with the valuation challenges within China. So I kind of tend to go a little bit outside because I can find a lot better investment opportunities outside. But one thing is very typical of our investments is that if they have not taken care of their Asia Pacific IP, we drop them. We do not even consider them as an option because as part of our strategy, we do like to leverage our China heavy presence. We have offices in Suzhou also to make sure that we can get the multiple what China market deserves from our investment. Most probably we will not be in the investment by the time it exits out into the market. So, because I think our critical focus is still going to be that our investments make money in US or Europe first.
Okay, for our fund, we are a new fund. So far, we have 2 years history, and we are an early stage fund. So we invest mainly in Series A, in Series B, and also sometimes in angel round. So we have invested some angel round companies, and also sometimes we actually form the companies. So we are focused on early stage medtech, life science, biopharma companies investment. So currently we have managed, invested 13 companies so far, most of them in the US and 4 companies in Israel and 2 in China. So also actually before, when we set up the fund, we plan to half in China, half international. But yeah, we also face valuation challenge in China, so we invest more in the US and the Israel companies. So okay, so we all have briefly introduced ourselves. So I think the first question for all our panelists is, we all see the trends, the cross-Pacific investment between China and US. So can you tell me a little bit about what's the current status and what's the trend for this cross-border investment? And ideally, if you have some concrete investment examples, you can also tell us. And so just let us and also audience understand what's the current status and the future trend of this cross-border investment.
Sure. Well, so maybe I'll go first, since obviously there's 2 directions, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I think there's probably going to be different examples. So I'll go first because while our fund is based in China and it's a US dollar fund where actually most of the investors come from outside China, our strategy is focused on the emerging market in China and the growth of the healthcare market there. But typically, that's going to be driven by innovation that's brought to China from outside for us. That's our strategy. And so, the trends that we look at are the improving regulatory environment, where the CFDA is issuing, even fairly recently, new guidance that's not final yet, but is certainly trending heavily in the right direction in terms of making it easier to get products through clinical trials. We're looking at the changing demographics that everybody knows about, the growing ability to pay for innovative products. Hopefully, improvements in healthcare insurance coverage in terms of having private healthcare insurance in China. So there's a lot of factors that we think are driving the growth of the market there. I don't want to get into all of this now because it'd be a long conversation, but I think it's pretty self-evident. And so we see all those trends as being positive in terms of being able to bring products to market and having a real market for them there. In terms of examples, probably a good example to give from our portfolio is a company called Ascletis, which is led by a former senior VP of antivirals for Glaxo, formed a new company in China to tackle HCV. So you may or may not know that Up until recently, there were still no oral direct-acting antivirals for hepatitis C on the market in China, even though obviously Gilead and others have been on the market here in the US for several years. So this is an example of a company that licensed a product from Big Pharma. In this case, it was from Roche, and it was a product that they had brought all the way through phase 2, shown had positive efficacy data, but then stopped their development over in the US because they were too far behind Gilead and Abbott and others. And so that product didn't have a future in the US or Europe, but actually it has a really good future in China because it was still a wide open field there. So they licensed that product, brought it to China, and actually brought it from IND filing to NDA filing in less than 2 years. So they were able to rapidly move it through clinical development. It was a relatively de-risked compound. We think the first product will get approved this year, and they have a combo product that we expect to get approved next year. And we've just put a bunch of additional capital into that company to fund the commercialization and build the sales force. So, we think this is a cycle and a model that we can repeat, several times in different therapeutic areas, where we find things that have a good opportunity there, may or may not still have a good opportunity in the West, and then find ways to get them to the market as fast as possible.
So I think Jason mentioned very, very appropriately that there's 2 ways, right? So if you take a look at from the China side into the US, in terms of cross-border investment, there's actually certain impediments that are in place right now, which is Chinese money, RMB funds, might be having a little more difficult time taking their money out into the US. And I think people are speculating when that's going to end. I don't know whether or not it's ended yet, but in terms of Chinese funds coming to the US, you want to make sure that ideally they would have a US dollar value attached to that. So Life Capital, for our second fund, we actually have an RMB fund and a US dollar fund. We call it Fund 2. In reality, it's 2 separate funds, but we're just calling it Fund 2. And the reason why is because there are some opportunities in China that only RMB can invest in, whereas with US dollars, you could also invest in the US. Our RMB fund, their LPs are clearly Chinese LPs, whereas our US dollar fund are more globally recognized institutions, academic institutions, fund of funds, endowments, et cetera, et cetera. So more in tandem with what more traditional Western venture capitalist groups go with. That being said, because we have a US dollar and RMB fund, we could do both side investment without any significant barriers. Now, what we've seen a lot of is actually Chinese companies wanting to come to the US and wanting to do US investments. But again, because of the financial barriers that the Chinese government put in place, you see a lot of wants, but not necessarily execution. But I think, again, with US dollar funds, it's a lot more easier. Now, as with our investment mandate of investing in Chinese companies, I'll give an example of one of the companies we invested in. I won't provide the name, but they're essentially an oncology-focused company. They're much more smaller, but they certainly have a lot of potential. And in the China market nowadays, having commercial capability is one thing, but having R&D capability and having access to international in-licensing kind of differentiates one company from another. And with that specific portfolio company, they have commercial products in oncology, they have commercial products in pain-related products, and it made a lot of sense to bring in a more innovative oncology product into their pipeline. And that model is essentially that you bring in an international compound that's earlier stage. The one we brought in for them was a preclinical compound, and the CTO has found something about that compound that is immensely attractive that could be used for potential out-licensing in the future. And he was dead on. He brought the compound into the company. They're doing all the development work in China, and after the development reaches a certain point, it'll be very attractive for multinational companies to license or even acquire worldwide rights for it. As a matter of fact, there are a few multinational companies that are already knocking on the door saying, hey, we're interested, please share with us once you reach these certain endpoints. So when push comes to shove, China and US, they'll be intertwined in terms of these long-term pharmaceutical developments, just because the markets are so large. And essentially, Life Capital is here to help foster this. And I think cross-border investment is here to stay, and it's going to be here for a long time.
So, number of points, I think very appropriate raised. I think our point of view is similar to, in the sense that we see most of the real innovation happening in US and Europe at this point, North America and Europe. I've been around in China for a very long time, and even though after the returnees coming back 2008 circa, that influx brought a lot of credibility to the science, but I think they're still a little bit far away from producing indigenous new good science. I think that's a challenge. There's another challenge we see within China is the issue of the management maturity. We don't see that as much as of yet. So I think that's why our tendency has been to actually bring in the IP from US, Europe, back to China. And we do also see a tremendous opportunity in that sense that the market size is so huge that there's just no way you can have clearly a winning strategy without having in your portfolio companies going back, taking that asset back to China. On the other hand, we have been hesitant in bringing China-only assets. As I told you, we are very much focused in, broadly speaking, North America, EU implementation first, whether it's med device, whether it's therapeutic, even service organizations that we are investing in, all tend to have their implementations in the outside market first, and then follow on with some really good management in China. As mentioned, the money coming out of China is very hard these days, so a lot of syndicate partners kind of fail when they actually make a call on those people, so you need to make sure whether the people you are looking at can actually bring the money out or not. So that's an ongoing challenge. I don't know how long it would last, who knows, but it's currently an issue. I think money taking into China is never an issue. Jason's life is easy in that sense. It's very easy to take money in, but as I've been being very honest, again, the multiples I've seen on valuations within China is just, I cannot in fair conscience ever come to a point that I can justify with just FYI, this year we have seen till June 800 plus deals. And it's very hard for us to, when we see the deal flow coming out of China, and we are in Suzhou. Suzhou itself has 500 plus biotechs, very good stock. I mean, but again, when I see what that over there is present, and then what we are able to find, actually we are never looking in Boston or San Francisco, just FYI. We are always looking in markets that are sort of underserved. So, but very good science. Without that, obviously, there's nothing to go about. So, I feel like that there's still a ways to go, but I think China always tends to do things very fast. So, what we have today will be definitely transition into something totally different in a couple of years. As from my first visit to now, you could not even imagine it's the same galaxy over there. So that's why I am always very hesitant to predict for more than a year or two in case of China. But I do agree, life has become a lot more interesting now with the recent CFDA rules on bringing assets back into China. And that's where the investment argument, a lot of the companies that we are dealing with, they actually really want that inherent onboard expertise and knowledge and connections for China with the money. So again, strategic money is a different concept. So they are all very much, when we go talk, they actually select us when a lot of these companies have quite a bit of choice. The good companies always have choice. And the reason they select us is that they also feel going into China is pretty important, but who to go with, so.
So if you don't mind, I'll chime in for one thing that I think Z mentioned is incredibly important, which a China patent, and make sure you get a China patent for any early stage companies out there, because I personally, I've seen many companies without China patents. They didn't really think China needed patents to operate, but nowadays you need to have a patent, or most Chinese companies won't take you seriously.
Exactly, and just to add to Yao's comment, there were few of the technologies we were looking at, really good technologies out of US, Europe, but no China patent.
Yeah.
And I was talking to 3 heads of top 5 major pharma in China, and all of them refused, because they don't even want to put a penny behind, which they can get free for development if it is not protected. So this is a really flip out of what I saw there even 10 years ago.
Do you mean China patent or application?
China patent.
So it's got to be issued.
Well,
No.
You've got to apply.
You have to have it.
Yeah, as long as you apply for the patent, then
Oh,
hopefully
okay.
it'll get issued. Like, it's fine, but, yeah, no, the patent, like 10 years ago, I mean,
Yeah.
we'll let that be, but, if you're talking about now, so, to resonate what you just said as well, like, I actually, before Life Capital, I was actually with a company called Yangzhou Pharmaceutical Group. They're essentially the largest Chinese pharmaceutical company, privately held, family owned, so not many people know where they stand, but revenue-wise, they should be about $8 billion US. Now, that's quite a large organization in China. But with them, originally, we were showing them a few companies without patents, and they were saying, no, wait, we're not gonna touch it. And that happened, I would say that happened starting around 2011, 2012.
And this is investing in a company. I'm talking about picking up technology free, you know? Here's the technology, they're not doing anything, you can pick up all that data and just go with it. No way. This was not the case before. And one of the things even today, number of company people, when I ask them about their China IP, they push back, oh, who's gonna protect it in China? How do you actually execute any kind of protection? And the problem is, even in US, people underestimate that you as a small company are never be able to protect your IP. It's all about who your partner is, and do they have the weight to bear upon where they want to execute to protect that IP. So if somebody here, a small company, thinks that they can protect their IP, they're in a la-la land, because they have never seen the bill that comes back. So I think that's part of the thing. It's important to know which partner you have. Although I have very different ideas about protecting IP in India, which I think is a lot worse situation than China is.
But I think that ultimately resonates to innovation is important. If you have innovation right now, and you have a China patent, and with the China regulatory situation, if you have a good compound, China's a good market to head to, and doing a lot of development as well.
So I've got a similar question to that. So, we've applied for a patent in China for a novel biologic composition method. We got our U.S. patent issued fast track very quickly. So typically, how long does it take in China to go from an application to an issued patent today?
Typically, over the past 15 years, my experience has been is that they wait till they see somebody else approve it first. So if you have US or EU somewhere approve it, that's a very good indication that they will follow up from there. If otherwise they're in a wait and see mode on most of the things that we have interacted with. Other people's experience may differ, but in our experience, if somebody has got something approved, then China usually is a lot easier to deal with.
It sounds like one more argument to do fast track in the U.S. then.
Yeah.
But I think that additionally on top of that, each country also have different rules, right? There's first to file and first to invent. Whereas I think, I don't remember the US situation, but I know that China, might have changed.
It used to be first
to invent.
Now it's first to file.
First to invent.
Everybody's now first.
Yeah, first to issue, okay. so-
Typically, it takes 3 to 5 years to get the patent approved, invention patent approved.
And I will mention also, since you mentioned different forms of patents, that in China there's different strength to different forms of patents. So if you have a composition of matter patent, like here, that's by far the strongest and the best. Method of use patents tend not to be all that helpful in China. Formulation patents, I hear mixed things. Sometimes it depends how it's written, sometimes it depends on what the formulation is. Polymorph patents can be pretty good, depending on the polymorph. So that's something that you have to explore in a specific situation in terms of what kind of patents are really all that strong in the China market, and it's not the same as in the US necessarily.
Yeah, for our fund, because, your question,
Yes,
okay, go ahead.
thanks. Can you explain for medical device, what is the difference between inventional patent and
Design patent?
utility patent?
Utility patent.
Yes.
I think for the invention patent, it's more on the, actually it's more on the degrees of your innovation. So if you invent something, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a patent agent, but based on my understanding, if you invent something big, it's an invention patent. But if you just make some like a design, it's make a little design change, it's a utility patent. But I'm not. That's basically is my understanding. So, do you have any comments?
I don't think I'm enough of an expert to
Ask a patent lawyer.
question, yeah.
You know the best.
It's always best to exactly, because they have a lot of nuances, especially given not knowing what your product is, it's very hard to comment.
I think it's worth adding, we take a look at patents, but we never dive as deep as patent lawyers do. So, and to add a little legal disclosure to that, anything we reference on patents, please refer to a patent lawyer as well. So.
Okay, so for our fund, because we invest in early stage companies, so it's one of our advantages that actually the companies usually easy to like reshape the structure of company. So like we invest last year we invested Boston-based company, and at the time we investment we all agreed to set up joint venture in China. So that's how we try to leverage our value add. And but then we invited the company CEO and CTO to China. They have never been to China before, and they come to China to spend 2 weeks in China. We invite them to tour around the Shanghai, Shenzhen, Beijing, Suzhou, and Hangzhou cities, and they're quite impressed. So they decided they talked with us. They decided they do not want to set up independent joint ventures and license the China rights to a joint venture. They want to just a single company, and with a holding company on top, and with US sister company and China company itself. So we all agree that this might be a better idea for these companies. So that's how we say for early stage companies, it's very easy to restructure the company to best leverage the China resource in this cross-border investment.
One point to that, and we are dealing with the 2 of investments right now, is there are certain parts in healthcare in China which are China only. So you tend to run into that whole woofy and all that fun stuff that comes with it, So you have to be careful in what sector you are in, because it's not simple to just create an entity there in that regard. So it's a little bit of a challenge to make sure that the ownership stream is correct. And don't assume that bad things don't happen still, they do.
So like, every marriage has its unhappy points, and I think that's what partnerships essentially are, right? Marriage between 2 companies. But I think going back to so sorry to divert this off tangent a little bit more, but once you mentioned joint ventures, I kind of want to emphasize this as well, which is nowadays, because of the capital restrictions in China, you hear a lot of people trying to push toward joint ventures. So you don't necessarily think of like a lot of people are afraid of joint ventures, they might not understand enough about it. I would say it's definitely worthwhile to kind of update your information, and because JV right now might be one of the best, lowest barrier ways to develop your compound in China, and to have a strong partner at it as well. And as time progresses, they could transfer the money on over later, but at least you'll have some share, and your shareholders would be pleased that at least you have something. But JV is something certainly that is a trend that at least I'm seeing. So I'm sure.
So
could you describe the recent capital restrictions when did they start, why, and any guesses at how long they'll last?
I think first of all our panelists found here, we do not have restriction, right? We all have offshore US dollar funds.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so
As I
they
put
said,
it.
I think maybe it was usually to make sure that whoever you're talking to.
No, I was just
Hedge
giving
funds-
sort
hedge
of
funds here.
such as advice that if you see a China investment fund,
Right.
you are raising money from them, be very careful, because when you make a call, they may not show up with money.
Right.
So, and I'm not talking about really, unknown ones. I have seen this happen to some seriously decent ones also, based on whether how much of a SOE color they had, If they are very much state-owned, it could really tinge the issues because you don't know what's going on in the background.
Right.
So you have to just make sure that if you are receiving investment out of China, you be very careful of how you interact with them in that regard. But I think as far as I cannot speak for other industries, but I think healthcare, I still feel there is a little bit more open attitude for releasing the money.
So is it still somewhat case by case? Because I don't know the background. I do know another company in Boston, in fact, was expecting an investment, and this was maybe 2 months ago, and there were some new restrictions. I'd love a little background on it.
So specifically, through personal experience, the capital restrictions started at the end of September of last year. And part of the reason why is the Chinese government essentially wants to prop up the RMB. And are there any government guys here? Just want to be sure I don't get in trouble. I'm born and raised in America, so I'll be a little more direct than.
It'd be easy for them.
Yeah, well, actually, go back to China, but essentially it's so the idea is it started happening at the end of January, and end of
I saw
September.
former China government.
Yeah, I know, find it right there. I know from Suzhou. So anything from Suzhou, but
This really the founder of Suzhou BioBay.
BioBay is a great organization.
Was my past life, so no worries.
But I think so far the capital restrictions are still there. There are a lot of rumors going on when they'll stop that, but it's really case by case basis.
Oh.
Thus far, I've not seen many firms successfully bring U.S. dollars out in a. So there are different paths. One is the appropriate path, right, and you need government approval, regardless if it's U.S. dollars or RMB. There is the gray path, which you go through, which you reroute the money through other markets. But then on one side, you kind of have to question that a little bit, because if they're willing to go gray markets, then from my perspective, I kind of question the integrity. But essentially, these two are essentially the two primary paths. When will it release? Rumors are rumors, right? It could happen at the end of this year. It could happen tomorrow. Chinese government is also a little unpredictable. But if they want to do something, they could do it.
So on the exit side of that same question, if a foreign investor were to invest into a Chinese company at this point, for an exit, would the capital restriction prevent them from repatriating the funds?
That's an incredibly good question. Case by case basis.
Right.
I'll leave it at that.
One more question on that topic. So, does this apply only to equity investment, or say you have a strategic deal with a pharmaceutical company in China, and maybe there's a licensing thing or an acquisition of a product? Is that also covered now?
So,
It's my kids.
so generally, if you're talking about licensing,
Yeah.
there'll be that barrier. If you're talking about investment, if they have RMB, then they'll also have that barrier. But it's all dependent on if you have a U.S. dollar fund. So I think everyone on this panel has U.S. dollar funds, so we won't have that impediment.
But no, the question was not actually for a fund. This is actually a Chinese pharmaceutical company.
You're doing a deal.
A strategic deal.
They will have impediments.
It depends also if the company already has a US
They could
dollar,
have US
offshore
dollars
US
already.
dollar,
Yeah.
they do not have any restriction.
Many ownership
Otherwise-
structures are relatively complicated. They'll have onshore entities, they'll have offshore entities, they'll hold different forms of currency. So it just depends on the company and on the situation.
And I know a lot of China big pharma already have subsidiaries in US,
Right.
they have US dollars, so we have restriction.
Probably also depends on the amount. I recently received the money from Taiwan in renminbi, and it transferred to my account. It's business to business, but a small amount, it's not a big amount. So it's very fast actually.
So I think to
So
add on
probably
that,
the big amounts, like more than million maybe.
exactly, I
probably.
think they're going other routes, like there's another route in between, going offshore and in China, but I've seen smaller amounts go that middle route.
No, there's a strict direct route from the bank account in the US, in China. They directly wire to the, like a Bank of America, and then a Bank of America to here. They,
Huh.
yeah, directly.
Yeah, no,
So
I
that's
think
the
there's
way
also
it's
another
like
angle is that, you know, it was mentioned numerous times, the JVs, you know, so I'll give you an example, if you have a JV in health IT in China, this is one of the restricted, where it is restricted to only Chinese nationals. So your JV would require somebody as a nominee structure over there, and they will be sitting with your renminbi in their pocket.
Yeah.
So again, so those kind of things, depending on the sector also, you have to be careful where you end up with. There's also like diagnostic business, that's also hospital business, that's also restricted. So there's now number of industries that have restrictions on even JV being owned by a foreign entity. It creates a lot of issues, so.
It's a question. I'm sorry. I'm a biochemist, so lots of what you're saying is Chinese to me. But are you saying, because we see a lot of, I'm in an incubator, we're a startup, and we get a lot of movement of Chinese investors in and out of. If I understand correctly, I mean, the guy might be willing to pledge, I don't know, $1, $2, $3 million, but then he might not be able to actually get it out of the country? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
If the,
It might already be out of.
if their company only has a RMB, it's probably very difficult to get out of the country.
But I think,
Alternatively, if you accept RMB, that's another way.
Except Israeli shekels, anything on paper, I'll take it. We can talk later.
No, again, you know,
Yeah, the
as
question.
a bypass to that, in previous, before Jules Fund, we had worked where we took the money in China, in renminbi, to basically take care of all the development. So again, you can accept the money, and if the money is gonna be expired, because it was all CMC, all the way tox package, animal studies, all the way to monkey studies, and that was quite a big bill.
Yeah.
So, which was all taken care of in renminbi, and they own stock in the US company.
But then,
So-
then you have to spend the money actually in China, in Chinese
Which
currency.
actually is not bad. Their service sector is amazingly good and is well stocked with absolutely top-notch talent. Almost in every big company is my colleagues who have spent in US 25 years. So I know them for such a long time, and they do a bang-up job there. There's nothing any less. If you ever go to Wuxi campus in Shanghai, there are 5 major pharma's campuses right on Wuxi campus. So it's a different world over there.
Actually, if you have money, RMB in US, you have found some way to exchange to the US dollar, right?
Yeah.
Right now, RMB become kind of public, you can change it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because we only have about 5 minutes. I think either if some audience still have questions, feel free to ask.
The question for you, so how many company you invest in United States with your US fund?
You mean me?
Yeah,
We invested in the US, invest 7 or 8 companies here.
okay, what's the size?
We typically, for each company, invest range from 1 to 5 million, typically
Okay.
2 or 3 million for each company. But we also, among these 8 companies, we invested 2 angel round.
Andrew.
Angel round just 500K for each one.
Good for you.
You said all of your funds are relatively young, and what is your exit strategy do you anticipate to have some of the companies get bought up or sold or go public? And if that is the case, is it in the U.S. Market or is it in China? And what do you measure success? I know this is a big question. You can just comment on any area.
Comment?
Yeah, so I can go first. So, I mean, I guess it's crass, but we measure success by ROI because we're a fund. So we're trying to get the largest multiple possible.
So you
Exactly. So in terms of exits, historically the trade sale market in China is not that robust, but we think it'll probably grow over time as more newer technologies reach the market. We think there'll be more consolidation, there'll be more larger companies, there'll be more public companies. Public companies that currently at least trade at a very high multiple there relatively to the US. So they have relatively cheap currency that they could spend acquiring other companies if they wanted to. But we do, when we plan our investments, we build an IPO case. So when we invest in something, we're thinking about how much capital they're going to need in order to become a public company at some point in the future. In most cases, because at least at Seabridge, we're developing products and funding products for the China market, we would expect to do that public offering in China or in Hong Kong, most likely. Companies do have to be much more mature in order to go public in China than they do in the US, but we're investing in later stage companies. The other path, which some of our Fund 1 companies have already taken, is doing a reverse merger. So merging into a public shell. Those shells are more expensive in China than they are in the US, probably for obvious reasons, because there aren't as many of them. And the process is more difficult, so you take more dilution, but it is a way to get public relatively quickly if you have a revenue stage or probably a profitable company. So that's something that we think about as well.
Again, for us, as any investor, is the ROI, but most of the investments we look at, we don't anticipate in US, EU, the IPO market for the companies at this stage is very attractive. So we normally would perceive them to be acquired at some point, because the scale that's required for phase 3 trial or to sell the product extensively is different. Although flipping it into China is a totally different ballgame. Their going IPO is a much more attractive proposition. Even in the service sector that we are coming in, the exits are based on an IPO strategy, because they give multiples on even service companies that are beyond imagination in the US side. I mean, that's why Wuxi went back. But that also points to the fact that the reverse merger philosophy didn't work out for Wuxi at all. It was a total disaster because the securities market shut them down on the reverse merger. So we, after having looked at that, we are basically looking at the investments going straight out if they can. So into IPO, no reverse mergers for any of the people we are pushing. But again, it's a whatever works. So
I think I resonate that as well. I think, again, as any fund, their objective is to make returns. And the reverse merger path is interesting, but I think most cases you want to go IPO in China. And if you look at, whether it be in China, Hong Kong, it really depends on the company. But you have to kind of, again, case by case, right? You have to look at what type of company would generate maximum return from what market. Now, I think a lot, as you mentioned, the trend of like Wuxi going private, there was Mindray going privatization, there's all these other large Chinese companies that went IPO in the US market that went private. It's just because the China market, the valuation is much more attractive. And but that being said, I would say acquisition isn't completely off. Like it's not impossible. So the founding partners of Life Capital, one of their more well-known investments was a company called Konghui, and that was an orthopedic company that was eventually acquired by Medtronic for $800-some odd million. So which is to date the largest medtech exit in China, which just shows that if there's a good company in China that has a market penetration, there is multinational companies that would be interested. So acquisition is not out of the question.
So if we want to keep the China IPO as the preferred exit channel. So what is the ideal if there is a company, corporate culture, structure when you started with set up the company? Since this is an early stage conference, I guess some of the audience were really still in the early stage of doing the company. So any
So
suggestions?
that's where what I was mentioning, maturity of the management. We don't see that much actually even in US, to be very honest. Companies are such convoluted structures because somebody had a brilliant idea that this way they will make more money or something like that. Again, if you have to be IPO ready, you have to start doing things right very early on, you know. So you cannot just suddenly one day think, oh, I'll be IPO ready. So I think this is where you know, the strategic capital, when it comes in, can enforce a level of rhythm and structure that these companies can then be ready to go IPO. I'll give you an example. One of my investments when I was in venture in San Francisco back in 2002 was out of Shenzhen. And that company, we made an acquisition with a company in Taiwan. And then Taiwan company went public. And you know, we made a bulkloads of money on that one. But it was, you know, again, knowing that the structure in Taiwanese companies was good, we helped them out. It was former Genentech guys, and so we were able to make a pretty good earning out of that. But that was part of the issue, that you need to know where the management is mature and understands.
Okay, so thank you for all the panelists and the audience.